Our lives, Jesus, come on. Our lives, our hearts, our hands, we're reaching out to see you move again, and we can hardly wait. Come flood this place, we're ready now. It's all about to change, and let your kingdom come, let your will be done, let your fire fall, let your fire fall. Open the heaven, pour your spirit out on us, unleash your presence. Jesus, come alive in us. Open the heaven. This time, this place, it's yours. Unlock the gates and open up the doors, and let your kingdom come, let your will be done, let your fire fall, let your fire fall. Open the heaven, pour your spirit out on us, unleash your presence. Jesus, come alive in us. Open the heavens. Darkness trembles, mountains shake. What was dead now comes awake. Every captive breaking free. Right now, right now, right now. Darkness trembles, mountains shake. What was dead now comes awake. Every captive breaking free. Right now, right now, right now. Open the heavens. Pour your spirit out on us. Unleash your presence. Jesus, come alive in us. Open the heavens. Open the heavens. Amen. Hey, it's good to see everyone. My name's Paul. I'm one of the pastors here on staff. We're so glad that you guys are here this morning, especially if you're new around here. Thanks so much for being here this weekend. We'd love to get to know you, know your name. And so after service, we've got a place just outside these doors called The Hub. We'd love to meet you, answer any questions that you have. And so be sure to stop by The Hub after the service so we can get to know you a little bit. Well, we're going to get going here. We've got a great service. We're going to sing some more songs together. And today, Joel Thomas, our lead pastor, he's going to conclude our series, I Want to Know What Love Is. But before we go any further, we'd love for you guys to turn to somebody, say hello, and we're going to get going here in just a second. Make way before the King of Kings. The God who comes to save is here to set the captives free. For who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is alive, the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. And every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains, and every knee will bow before the Lion. Every knee will bow before Him. Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord Almighty? No one can. Who can stop the Lord Almighty? No one can. Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. And every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains, and every knee will bow before the Lion. Every knee will bow before Him. Let's make this our prayer this morning. You came to the world you created, and trading your crown for a cross, you willingly died. Your innocent life paid the cost. And counting your status as nothing, the King of all kings came to serve, washing my feet and covering me with your love. If more of you means less of me, take everything. Yes, all of you is all I need. Take everything. You are my life and my treasure, the one that I can't live without. Here at your feet, my desires and dreams I lay down.
Well, if you're new to Mission, that may feel like a bit of an extreme step. If you're paying attention to the lyrics and not just the music, that's a pretty bold thing to say is, hey, if really life and experiencing more in life is about giving more of myself away, if really experiencing more of you and experiencing more in life is about giving more of me away, then I want you to have everything. And I just want you to know, if you're brand new, this is a journey that we're all on. And there are steps along that journey, steps of faith. And I just think as we sing that song, it's fitting today, as we sing that song, that we're gonna celebrate and sort of commission a group of people that are going out on a trip. As a matter of fact, we have some students, I'm gonna bring them out now, some high school students that are getting ready to head out on a mission trip. And they're headed to Malawi, Africa. And they leave in just a couple of days. Some of you remember our partner, our LoveWorks partner in Malawi, Africa. Some of you, last year, you sponsored kids to help us with their feeding programs. But beyond that, they do lots of work. They provide clean water to a community. They provide care in the slums. And not only that, they're providing structured community and help to people all around them. And they're doing it all in the name of Jesus and really reaching out in love. And our team's going to partner with them for 10 days, a 10-day trip. All of these students going on their fall break, which I just parenthetically need to say, I don't know what you did with your fall or spring break when you were growing up, but I know that I wasn't going on a mission trip to Malawi, Africa. And This is a massive sacrifice. Many of these students standing behind me, they've been preparing, they've raised money, they've said no to other things, maybe family trips or fun things they could be doing, and have decided to do exactly what we just sang. They say, I want to experience more of you, God. I want to experience more of what it is to live my life for you. So I'm going to sacrifice in a season. And in this season, my hope is that I'll experience more of you by giving away myself, putting behind my sort of desires and agendas to align my life and really submit myself to what you have for me in these days. So here's what I want to do. I want us to pray for them. And if that's a little uncomfortable for you, if you're new, basically what we're doing as we commission them is just saying, God, not just protect them, but use them in a significant way to impact people, and not only impact the people they're going to see, but impact their hearts in a significant way. So if you feel like it and you want to pray with me along as I pray, or if you want to reach out your hand just as an attitude saying, hey, I'm praying as well for them, I'd love for you to do that. So I just love for you to bow your head as I pray for them as we send this group out this week. God, thank you for these teenagers who in many ways are leading the way for the rest of us, who've decided in this season, I want to go for a period of time, God, and I want to see what it's like to experience difficulty and hardship that we don't experience in the U.S., and I want you to work through me and work in me. And God, I would pray as we sang that you would do what only you can do, and that you would change them as well as impacting people through their love. I pray that your love flowing through them would cause them to experience you in a way they never have before, and that it might change the trajectory of their lives just enough to lead them to greater meaning and purpose in life as they align their lives on mission with you. And I pray it in Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Will you do me a favor and give this group of people a big round of applause as they head off? Thank you guys so much. You're free to go. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. That's not even the whole group. Amazingly, there's a few of our students that are up at camp this weekend leading our 4, 5, 6 group, and 7th and 8th graders, they serve as small group leaders. But we're gonna sing this chorus one more time. Here's how we're gonna do it. I want you to consider, would it look like for you to say, okay, God, I want you to take more of me so I can experience more of you. And I want you to do so that you can change me. We all know you didn't need to come to church to find out you need to be changed. We all know we need to grow, we need to change. The truth is I want you to change me like only you can, to make me more like Jesus so I can experience the more that you have for me. So let's sing this one more time before we close our worship time.
Oh Lord, change me like only you can. Here with my heart in your hands. So Father, I pray, make me more like Jesus. This world is dying to know who you are. You showed us the way to your heart. So Father, I pray, make me more like Jesus, more like Jesus, more like Jesus. Well, that's our prayer this morning. We celebrate becoming more like Jesus, becoming more passionate, becoming more loving and merciful and graceful. Becoming more like Jesus means we look to those around us. We love them. We forgive. We give them grace and mercy. And that's what I love about this community of people, this church, is that is on the forefront of our minds. Making Jesus more, becoming less, so that everyone around us can see the love of Jesus. Amen? It's good to see you guys and worship with you all this morning. Y'all can have a seat. We're going to continue to worship by receiving an offering, and so I'm going to invite our volunteers to come as we receive that offering and our tithes.
Don't you just want to like hum or sing along, or you may not be a singer, whistle along. It's just like, every Sunday I get these songs in my head for the whole week. If you haven't been with us, today we're actually concluding our series, I Want to Know What Love Is. And if you haven't been with us, I think today is still going to be intensely practical for all of us. But you really do need to go back and sort of unpack and figure out what we've been talking about the last several weeks, because these weeks have really built sort of to a conclusion today. And my goal is to try to bring all of this together. The fact that we're finishing today means we're starting something brand new next week. And I'll just say this as a quick commercial for next week. Next week, we're going to start a series called Grace and Peace. And it's actually a series on the book of Colossians. And my guess is that there's some of you here who've never actually studied through an entire book of the Bible. And we're going to go through the entire book of Colossians in 4 weeks, over the next 4 weeks in the book of, or in the month of October. And there's going to be some things we do on the weekend, outside of the weekend, some stuff you can do on your own. But I want to challenge you to consider being here for the entire month of October and trying to track with us. And I know it's fall break, so some of you are already watching online at your cabins or in California, wherever you are, while the rest of us are jealous here. But the truth is I would love for you to try to track to make it a goal to go through the entire book of Colossians over the next 4 weeks. And I think it'll be fun and it'll be beneficial for all of us. As we're concluding our series today, I want to go back. Last week, we looked at some personalities, and they're not really these aren't really specifically personalities, but they're ways in which we all learn to love. And these characters represented last week, we went through each one of them. They represented 5 specific love styles. And again, this isn't your natural wiring. This isn't something that the DISC assessment or Myers-Briggs could tell you. These are things that involved an imprinting in your childhood, that were how you learn to love. Now, I just gotta say this because I ran into several guys this last week who told me, aren't most guys avoider? Why did you pick a chick to be the avoider? I can't relate. I can't relate. So you're Buzz Lightyear. That's another option. In fact, most of these characters can be found in Toy Story. But don't dismiss because you don't relate to the character, or you're like, I don't want to be that person, or I don't want to be the big ugly ogre. So don't push back against that. What we found out last week is that all of these things aren't things the way that God designed us, and they're not even really things you chose. The reality is at a really early age, most of us either experienced something or failed to experience something that became the root of our love style. And all of this, as we talked last week, it's connected to the idea of comfort or true comfort. Now, as an adult, many of you are thinking, I don't need to be comforted. I don't need somebody to comfort me. But in your childhood distress, you didn't experience a true memory of comfort. Many of us didn't. We can't think back to, what is that memory of comfort from childhood that caused me to relate or to love in this sort of way. And so what happened in adulthood for many of us is it caused us, to react or to relate in a certain way. Can you go to the next slide? So here's what I want you to see is that we all learned, and we saw this last week, we all learned our deepest love lessons in our earliest moments of distress. That whether you realize it or not, and whether you remember it or not, that's the tricky part, whether you remember it or not, there was an imprint, there was a style of loving that you learned at your earliest age, your deepest love lessons you learned at some of the earliest ages. And you have been operating since. And that's why in adulthood, especially in relationships, when you experience conflict or pain or distress, which is when most relational issues happen, is when there's disagreement or there's pain or there's difficulty or we experience crisis. The truth is what happens is you automatically revert to childhood. As a matter of fact, other people in your adulthood, they experience a pre-programmed, this is what we said last week, a pre-programmed response from your childhood. And I told you last week, look, here's the thing. You can focus as we found some of these, and I'll just say last week as we were going through this and we were talking about this and I brought up all the characters, I saw a lot of elbowing, oh yeah, that's you, or if you haven't taken the assessment, or yeah, that's exactly what you do. And here's the thing, that can be a whole lot of fun, but at the same time, it can also turn into a finger pointing thing, hey, this is what you need to work on. And what we do is we become way more focused on our partner or our spouse or our significant other and their issues and their difficulty. And one of the things I warned you last week is you need to focus on you, not your spouse, not your significant other. Here's why, because you can't actually control them and you can't actually change them. But if you want your relationship to change in you will actually change your relationship. And here's why, because the dynamic of your relationship will change when you change. And if you want a new way of relating and a new dynamic, we're gonna talk a lot about that today, just you changing by yourself, even if your partner doesn't work with you, even if they don't partner with you, the truth is the relationship can still change and you can still grow and you can experience something brand new in your relationship. However, having said that, today we're gonna move sort of to the next step, and it's gonna get really, really practical today because Rob Bass and DJ Easy Rock were actually right. It takes two to make a thing go right. You with me? And it takes two to make it out of sight. Like you can experience better, but if the two of you, and this is sort of my plea at the beginning, I need to get this off the screen fast because we don't need screenshots of this going all over the web. Here's what I told you the first week. The root of 95% of issues is not what happened in your relationship, it's what you brought into the relationship, and both of you brought things into the relationship. And so both of you got you to where you are. And you might want to say, oh no, he did more or she did more. I mean, that you'll never win that argument. That's never gonna get solved. Both of you contributed. So here's the thing. If both of you behaved your way into the situation, you can behave your way out of it. And I wanna show you, it's not just behavior modification. This goes back to the root of all the things we've been talking about because you, whether you realize it or not, you have a core pattern in your relationship, a way of relating. And you do it over and over and over. And some of you know you do the same thing over and over and over. You experience that. In fact, that's the lid you hit in your relationship. You hit a glass ceiling in your relationship and you were wanting more. You were wanting better, you were wanting greater. And the truth is when you hit this glass ceiling, what would happen is you would cycle back around and try to break the glass ceiling and experience more. And you kept going around and around and around. And whether you know it or not, you have this sort of dance or this cycle or this pattern of relating that you have. And it's a little bit different for everybody, but the truth is that's a result of your love style. It's the result of two love styles coming together. I'll never forget the first time that I listened. I was actually listening to a seminar by the authors of the book that I've been telling you about, the ones that created that quiz, the online quiz, which if you haven't taken that, it's gonna be on our website for a couple more weeks. I met several people this week who said, I'm loving this series. I said, well, did you take the quiz? I haven't taken the quiz yet. I said, oh, you're an avoider. So I get that. Or you're a controller. You had questions about, tell me about how the quiz was created. And I'm like, okay, you're a controller. But here's the thing. I secretly do that with everybody, so don't tell anybody. But these authors, I remember I was listening to a seminar that they did, and for the first time I heard somebody describe the pattern of which Jen and I related to each other. And they described sort of how things went in our relationship. And they described our friendship. They described how we partnered in leading and managing our home. They described our sexual relationship. They described even our parenting styles and how that went together based on our love lessons. And I had this epiphany. In fact, I'd been listening to all this, and I was with my wife. I remember we were outside. We were actually on vacation. We were sitting out by the pool, and I was listening to this thing, and I kept going, oh my goodness, I can't. It's like these people are reading our mail. They've got surveillance in our house. And here's what I realized: we're not alone. And neither are you. And we're not the first. Someone knew so much of what we were experiencing because they knew of our love styles. They actually wrote it down and published it. They knew what was going on and could describe it, maybe not with exact detail, but with remarkable clarity as I sat there and listened. And I thought, oh my goodness, if somebody's identified this, there's hope. And whether you realize it or not, wherever you are in your relationship, there's hope for more. Whether you're in a place where you feel like you're hopeless or you're just wondering if after years and years and years, maybe 20, 30, 40 years, if you'll ever experience what you are ultimately desiring to experience, if this is it, or whether you'll experience more. And here's the truth, is if you'll listen today and you'll consider some of the things we're gonna talk about, I think you can begin to experience more and quickly in your relationship. If you're committed as an individual, and as a couple, I'll talk about the difference in just a second. If you're committed, you can change that core pattern of the way in which you relate. Now, there's 15 total possibilities. I don't have time to go through all of them, but I just thought I'd show you just real quick, just for the sake of relating. I wanna do for you what somebody did for me. So if you're a vacillator and avoider, we're gonna start with you, vacillator and avoider. I don't know how many of these couples, but this is one of the top 3 most common combinations. For some reason, vacillators and avoiders move towards each other. They like each other. And so here's the relationship dance between the vacillators and the avoiders. Here's how conflict always starts. It always starts by the vacillator venting, okay? And this is gonna be a pattern, by the way. Vacillator, I'm not picking on you. Here's the thing, if we didn't have you, we wouldn't know there were issues in the relationship. But because of you, we know there are issues and we know quickly, okay? So the vacillator vents, and here's what happens. Usually it's because of them not experiencing, I told you last week, they like intense connection and they idealize relationships. And when the relationship's not matching up, it may not be the core issue, but something happens that breaks the straw, breaks the camel's back, and they just sort of vent. And when they vent, not just one thing, not just this issue, they talk about this thing and the thing that happened last week and last month, and they're all over the place. And all of a sudden, the avoider, they're stunned. They're like, wait a minute, what just happened? And if this is early in a relationship, you're going, sweet Jesus, what did I get myself into, right? If you've been married for a long time, here's what the avoider actually does. The avoider goes, okay, here we go again. I've seen this before, and I know what's happening. And you know what? Usually what happens is over time in a relationship, the longer relationship, the avoider goes, okay, they listen, yeah, it's fine. It's not as bad as you think it is. And here's the problem, is then the vacillator feels dismissed, and they feel minimized. And you know what? That's exactly what they experienced in childhood. And it connects to a hurt from their childhood. Because in their childhood, the vacillator usually was not prioritized. They were dismissed. They were sort of minimized, their problems and their issues. And now the issue is not just what happened in your relationship. The issue is their entire life's worth of pain coming flooding into this relationship. The vacillator's hurt, and the conflict escalates even further. They don't shut down. The vacillators, they're fight or flight, and so they're in it, and they dig their heels in, and what happens is the avoider becomes overwhelmed because there's all this emotion, there's all this difficulty, and what they see is irrational, and they wonder, why can't you just figure this out on your own? That's what I do. I figure it out. Like, I don't bring all my stuff to you. I don't dump it all on you. Just figure it out. And so what happens is the avoider eventually, they'll listen for a while, but then they retreat. They sort of check out, and sometimes they get busy doing other things, and they just avoid the conflict. And then the vacillator, what happens is, alone in their difficulty, they have an internal conflict. And I know this person so well because I am one of these people. They're able to have the dialogue and the fight on their own without you. They are. And they get mad, and they get mad at you, and they get mad at themselves. And they're expressing of their anger internally. You know what that happens? That actually causes some relief. And the avoider, they just sit around and wait. And they wait because they know eventually you'll get over it. And when you do, you come back, and the avoider acts like nothing happened. And the vacillator, because of their intense desire for relationship, for connection, they move back towards the avoider after that distance that they don't like. And eventually, it doesn't solve the problem, but eventually things are fine, and they come back to the vacillators. This isn't what I wanted. They vent again. You just go over and over and over. If you're a pleaser and a vacillator, again, I'm not picking on the vacillator, but the vacillator starts this relationship as well. The vacillator, it starts by venting with the pleaser, except the pleaser responds differently than the avoider. The pleaser panics because the pleaser needs everybody to be okay, and they panic because they didn't know they did something that disrupted their partner being okay. And they panic, and usually when they panic, they try to appease. They're nice. Again, I told you this last week. Pleasers are nice people. And they decide to be nice, and they appease. And even at times, I told you this, they have a hard time being truthful. They'll lie about the issue if it sort of dismisses the problem, if it resolves the conflict, if it sort of calms down their partner, especially the vacillator. So they panic, and then this actually makes the vacillator more mad because the vacillator doesn't want nice. They want real. They don't want lies. They want to deal with the truth, and they want to deal with it right now. And we're going to get this all out on the table, and we're going to figure this out. And at this point, the pleaser becomes dejected because they're like, I can't make them happy. And if you're a pleaser, you felt this before. You thought, I can't do anything right. I can't ever make them happy. It's never enough. And they become dejected, and they sometimes even come to a place where they sort of begin to resent even trying in the first place. And the vacillator sort of goes off by themselves. And again, they have the whole argument all over again in their head. They sort of resolve for themselves. And the pleaser waits for them to come back, but different than the avoider. They don't sit there and think they'll eventually get over it. The pleaser waits anxiously, hoping they'll come back, hoping this isn't the end. And the reason is because in childhood, there was difficulty over and over and over in their home. In fact, oftentimes, pleasers come from a home where one or more of the parents left the home, and they felt like it was their fault. And so they're waiting and hoping that somebody doesn't leave and that this won't be the end. And when the vacillator finally resolves the conflict, resolves the argument in their own head, they come back and they sort of just decide they're gonna move on, and the pleaser's relieved. And for a time, it's fine until the vacillator vents again, and they go over and over and over. They do the same thing over again. Anybody relating to any of this? I still see the elbowing going on. I'm gonna let it go for a little bit. I got hands up in the air, so that's good. I might just invite you guys up and let you tell your story, and then we'll be good for the rest of the time. Let me do just a couple more real quick. Here's another one. The pleaser and avoider. And this is a fascinating relationship. And I just want you to see if you notice anything about this pattern. This one actually starts, because there's no vacillator, this starts with the pleaser feeling anxious. And they're hyper vigilant about how's everything going, especially with the avoider, because the avoider doesn't show any emotion. They don't wear their emotions on their sleeve. They don't know what's happening with them. And so when there's distance or the avoider's quiet, they wonder, are they okay? Did I do something? Did I make them mad? And so they're sort of hyper vigilant, and they're monitoring the avoider, which is annoying to the avoider. The avoider's like annoyed with their neediness. They see it as needy. And really the pleaser's trying to care, but they see it as needy, and it's like, would you just leave me alone? Everything's fine. Like, yeah, I maybe had a bad day, but I'll figure it out. I'm not like you. I'm not gonna dump that on the table. I'm fine. The avoider's like, I can manage this all in my own head. And then the pleaser feels rejected because they wanna help. They want to appease. They wanna be part of the solution. And it feels like the avoider's holding them at arm's length. And the pleaser begins to wonder, like, will we ever be close? Will they ever let me in? Do they really care? And the avoider, in the midst of that, because the pleaser becomes more and more emotional, and usually there's tears at this point with the pleaser, they sort of avoid it, and they begin to detach. They detach from the situation. They detach from the emotion, again, because they're overwhelmed by this. Same with as the vacillator. And they sort of detach from the situation, which causes the pleaser to feel threatened. As I told you before with the vacillator, the pleaser begins to wonder, are they gonna leave? Like, are they gonna be completely disconnected? Am I gonna be on my own? And they feel threatened, and they have that fear and anxiety from their childhood that comes rushing back into this relationship, and it can cause them to do crazy things. Like, this is where oftentimes a pleaser can fall into another relationship because of an emotional support or an emotional attraction to somebody else. And there are all sorts of things that the pleaser can do here because they feel vulnerable. But eventually what happens is, the avoider returns. And when the avoider returns, because everything's okay with the avoider, because whatever the issue they had becomes resolved because they deal with it on their own, they come back and they act like nothing happened. And they're fine, because that's what avoiders are. They're fine all the time. And when they come back and they're fine and they're okay, guess what? The pleaser's okay, because that's all they ever wanted in the first place. I just want everybody to be okay. And so the problem doesn't get solved, it just gets swept under the rug, which the pleaser is fine with. They're okay with that. But eventually, they begin to feel distance, something happens, and they feel anxious, and they go over and over and over. Actually, those three patterns represent about 80 to 85% of all the relationships. Specifically, the people that come in for counseling that go, hey, help us figure this out. We feel crazy. We do the same thing over and over. But there's another one it's a very predominant relationship. It's the controller and the victim. And I told you last week, they move toward each other. And this is a pretty simple pattern. The controller usually vents because there's something that becomes it threatens their need for control, not just their desire for control, but their need for control. And the victim reverts to childhood. They remember they lived with a controller. They lived in an environment where there was anger, and the controller becomes angry. I told you this last week. They become angry when their control is threatened because of insecurity. Now, you don't think of controllers as insecure, but they're insecure. And they become angry because they don't know how to express other emotions, because all other emotions besides anger are vulnerable. And they don't know how to be vulnerable. Nobody ever taught them to be vulnerable. And so the victim reverts to childhood, and they try to just fly under the radar, which the controller, they sort of escalate their anger, and sometimes and oftentimes, not oftentimes, in really unhealthy situations, this becomes an abusive relationship, either emotionally or physically. And the controller's upset because they feel like the victim doesn't want to do anything or can't do anything. And it doesn't relieve the difficulty they're feeling. And so the victim further detaches. And they can detach not just from their emotions, not just from the situation, not just from their partner. They detach from themselves. And even in situation of abuse, they can detach from the abuse. Because victims are survivors. You think of them as weak, but they're not. They're actually really strong. They've survived some really difficult things. And this is how they survive, is they detach from those things that hurt them. The controller eventually feels the distance and doesn't like it, so they compensate. Sometimes they apologize. Whether they really own up to and mean it doesn't really happen very often, but the reality is they move back towards the victim. You know why? Because the distance makes it harder for them to control. And that too is threatening to the controller. So the controller moves back towards the victim, and the victim usually relents because of some promise that things are gonna be different or things are gonna be different in the future. And they continue on sort of acting like, nothing really happened, or things are gonna get better. And they do the same cycle, the same dance over and over. Okay, now, I don't have time to go through all of them because we've gotta actually get to what's the solution. But you can see when somebody begins to describe these things, whether it's you to a T or not, it's like, I can relate to some of that. Now, if you're here today and I didn't connect with your combination, all of these, when you took that quiz, you could sign in, you can actually plug in your partner's style, or you can both take it together and it'll tell you, it'll give you a description of your core pattern, it'll give you some help. So you can find a lot of that same stuff online and some helps. And if you're both avoiders, or you're both pleasers, you're both vacillators, or you're both controllers, which almost never happens, here's the good news is you understand each other. And you're actually way out of this. It's a little easier than the rest. It may be more volatile in some cases because if you're both vacillators, there's lots of fireworks in your relationship, both good and bad. Like there were fireworks in the beginning when you were both excited about the relationship, and there are fireworks when you get into conflict. And that's, but at least you understand each other. Now, here's why this is all important. There's a guy named John Gottman, and John Gottman he's seen as the godfather of marriage research. He's, over 4 decades, done more extensive research than anybody has on marriage or long-term relationships, mostly marriage relationships. And he's come to some fascinating conclusions. The first conclusion he came to is that 70% of your problems can't be resolved. So if that isn't encouraging, I don't know what is. Like, hey, you got problems and 70% of them are never gonna be solved. So way to go. But guess what? If you leave the relationship you're in now and you go to another relationship, 70% of your problems are not gonna be able to be resolved because it's an average. And that's just the way most relationships work. And those are primarily personality things. Essentially, this is what this means. No, she is never gonna see on time as being 5 minutes early. It's never gonna happen. He's always gonna wait to the very last minute to do all of his planning and his preparation and his packing for his trip. It's just gonna happen. That's a personality trait. That's the way things are. And you're sort of, those differences are what attracted you to each other. We talked about that in week 1. But the reality is those things are never gonna be solvable, and you shouldn't try. But maybe the most valuable thing that came out of his research is that there were 4 things that he discovered were relationship killers. They actually absolutely destroy relationships. And actually, this is what I love. This is his title. He calls them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. These are the 4 things that are sure to destroy your relationship if you let them. And there are 4 things that and again, I don't have time to go through all of these right now, but these are things that you would all go, okay, yeah, those are things that we know. Those are bad for our relationship. When you become critical of each other. Contempt, which is, we're gonna talk about this in a second, but it's like sarcasm or sort of picking at each other or sort of instead of being for somebody, you're sort of like being critical of them, but to another degree where you're sort of pushing them. Being defensive, which we all have the tendency to do, and to stonewall. Stonewall basically means to either avoid but not confront problems and move towards solutions. And these 4 things, what they discovered were present in all of the relationships that ended up failing. In fact, this is remarkable. Of all the couples they studied, there were over 3,000, and some of them they studied for 2 decades. They were able to discover within just a few meetings with 90% accuracy which couples would stay together and which couples would end up going their separate ways. With 90% accuracy because of these 4 things involved or are present in a relationship. Now, These four things, as we just discovered and as we talked through the core patterns, I don't know if you're paying attention or not, but these are all things we talked about in the core patterns. These are all things that are present in our natural tendencies from our earliest love lessons when we get together. And here's the thing, there is a way to create a new pattern. And if we move towards a new pattern, the truth is you can avoid all of these things. You can avoid all four of these things that have the tendency to erode and destroy relationships. And there's a biblical model. All of these things come right out of the scriptures. And if you started reading How We Love, you know that their basic, what they call the comfort circle, which is how we're comforted in distress and how we move through difficulty and difficult circumstances. And I know, guys, I lost all the guys when I said comfort circle. Just forget about that. The reality is this is a new pattern of relating. How do I erase my old pattern or move away from my old pattern and move to a new pattern so that I don't continue to hit that glass ceiling over and over and over? This new pattern actually has an ability to pull the lid off of your relationship. The first step in this new core pattern is to become aware. This is what we've been talking about. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Let me ask you a question. What is your strategy to guard your heart? I mean, come on. This is what we've been talking about in this series. How easy is it for you to focus on what's going on inside of you? As we've talked about these love styles, how easy is it for you to go back and search? Where are these feelings coming from? Why do I feel? Are you willing to be honest? To be honest about, next slide, be honest about the why behind what you're feeling. I mean, I know you think it's because he did that or she did that or they won't, or we've talked about this over and over and over, but what's really behind that? What's the feeling? What's the root of the feeling of where that came from in your life? Because what you're experiencing in your relationship, as we said the first week, that's just a trigger for a deeper feeling. It's connected to something deeper. 95%, the root of 95% of the things you're dealing with in your relationship are connecting to something deeper in you. Are you willing to be honest about the why behind what you're feeling in your relationship? And some of you know this, talking, reflecting, positive talk, reflecting, writing things down. They can all help with positive awareness. But here's the thing, what you're trying to avoid is criticism. This is what's going on inside of me. I feel this way. When I experience this is what happens. This is not you. You is the criticism that destroys relationships. This first step of awareness is all about exploring what's going on inside of you. Did you know we're way better at criticizing our spouses or our partners than we are guarding our own heart? I mean, it's reflexive for us to criticize somebody else when we feel something we don't want to feel. And it's natural for us. And I'll just say this, whether you're a Jesus follower or not, you may not believe this, but that's our sin. Our sin causes us to want to point a finger at somebody else, and it makes it natural for us to want our partner to make us feel a certain way. We want our partner to make us feel what we want to feel, and we become dependent on that. And when they don't make us feel what we want to feel, we refuse to do for them and make them feel the way they want to feel in the relationship. And so here's the thing. What's really going on inside of you? Now, I want to give you, I got to keep moving. This is going to be like fire hydrant today, just so you know. Here's the thing. I want to give you a quick exercise. If you're not good at this, I'll just say this, no, I'm not pointing any fingers. If you're a vacillator, if you're an avoider, if you're basically anybody but a pleaser, you need some help with this, because the truth is pleasers are incredibly self-aware. But everybody else, here's the thing. You need some help with this. And there's just, whether you realize it or not, you have two tanks in your life. People talk about your love tank. You actually have two tanks that contribute to your love tank. The first one is a fuel tank. And the fuel tank is something that sort of inspires you or causes you to want to be in the relationship or wants you to keep going or wants you to do the sort of things that are going to build up your relationship. And then the other one is a pressure tank. You have a pressure tank or a stress tank. And all of us have both of these tanks. Now, in order to be a little more self-aware, here's something you could do. I want you to sit down and I want you to consider, what are 2 or 3 things that my spouse could do that would fill my fuel tank, and what are 2 or 3 things that would relieve my pressure tank? Here's what you might discover. You don't actually need your spouse to fill the fuel tank. You don't actually need the spouse to relieve the pressure tank. In some cases, you've put way too much pressure. You've put way too much stock. You've put way too much of a load on your spouse to make you feel okay. And the truth is you can be fueled in other ways. And I'm not talking about illegitimate ways, but just ways in life. There are other things you could do that would give you fuel. And maybe it's an activity or a hobby or time away, and you need permission to do something like that. Others of you, you need help because there are certain things your spouse is doing or in your life that you need to relieve pressure. And that may be a getting away. It may be something to blow off steam. But the truth is for you to be, just real quick, to be an adult and to self-regulate, you need to know what's going on inside of you. We so easily push this off on somebody else. And the truth is this is sort of your responsibility to become aware of what's going on inside of you, and understanding what's going on in your fuel tank and your pressure tank will help you to become more self-aware. Okay, I need to move to the next one. I took way too much time, but that one's really important. Number 2, the second step is to engage. This is I feel like this is where I'm speaking at you, but I'm mostly speaking to myself today. I'll just say, this is what mature people do. I discovered about 7 years into marriage, I was not a mature adult. And I was not only a mature adult, I was not a mature in Christ. And what mature people in Christ do is, instead of their core pattern, instead of falling into the things that cause us to relate in unhealthy ways, instead, we speak the truth in love. And we grow up to become, in every respect, the mature body. This is what Christians do. Mature body of him who's head, that is Christ. That is, in Christ, in my relationship with Christ, after I become aware of what's going on inside of me, I begin to engage life. I begin to engage my spouse. I begin to engage my partner in healthy ways where I'm speaking the truth in love. The reason we don't do that is because of our love styles. You've heard the term arrested development. Some of you don't know how to do that. If you're a pleaser, you don't know how to tell the truth about what you're feeling when it causes disappointment in your spouse, or it causes you to say something negative about them because it causes them to not be okay, and that is foreign to you. You want everybody to be okay, and you don't want to be the cause of anybody's pain or difficulty. And the truth is you don't know how to speak the truth in love. You have to become aware and begin to understand and ask God to help you heal from that so you can begin to move toward your spouse. This is so important. This involves moving toward each other authentically and respectfully. This involves humility. This involves vulnerability, things that all sorts of different styles don't like. But this is how we avoid contempt. Contempt is that thing that Gottman talked about. In fact, he says of the 4, this one probably is the greatest relationship killer. Contempt involves sarcasm and cynicism and name-calling and eye-rolling and mockery and hostile humor. And the thing is most people go, who would do that? All of us in secret. All of us behind the closed doors. Many of us have thought, when somebody says, oh, your spouse is so nice, or they're so gentle, they're so understanding, you're like, oh my gosh, you don't live in my house, right? Like, we've all thought that, because here's the thing. When you live with somebody, you see them at their worst. And we all have the tendency to do these things and create contempt in our relationships. Now, some styles more so than others, but here's the thing, here's the problem with this. This creates a culture that's void of safety and honor in our relationships. And when you don't have safety and honor, people don't engage authentically with one another. Again, we talked about this. Intimacy is about access. And if I'm gonna be fully who I am and be real about who I am, if you're gonna experience true intimacy with me, there's gotta be a safety in our relationship. The goal is, in our relationship, to be able to express feelings and needs honestly and openly. The avoiders are going, I don't know if I have many feelings. I definitely don't wanna express them openly and honestly. I'm willing to tell the truth, but I'm more logical. We're gonna talk about that in just a second. But here's the thing. When you can come to a place where you're saying, here's what's going on with me. I've become aware, and here's what's going on with me. And I'm not gonna attack you. I'm not gonna point the finger at you. This is what's going on with me. This is what's going on inside of me. And I just need you to know what's happening inside of me. That changes the game. It's not about contempt. It's not about criticism. It's not about pointing a finger. It's about, I want you to see me as I am, and I realize some of these issues, even though they're maybe driven by things that you're doing, some of these issues are deeply rooted inside of me, and they have nothing to do with you. It's just that our relationship is triggering these things inside of me. And that's why I'm responding the way I am, which is incredibly vulnerable, but it's beautiful, and it's what we all really, really want in a relationship. Somebody, as we said at the beginning, to go take us back to the garden where we can be, and keep your minds in church, naked and unashamed, and go, okay, this is who I am. And know that we won't be rejected. Know that we'll still be loved and accepted. And know that our partner will move toward us, which leads us to step number 3, is to explore. When somebody comes to you in that vulnerable way and is willing to bring up the issue and bring it to the surface. And again, for avoiders, for controllers, for victims, they have a really hard time coming to the surface and engaging. Vacillators, not so much. But explorers, controllers and pleasers and really all the other styles, they have a harder time sort of moving and engaging. But when they do, your job is to now explore. We talked about this in week 2. Ted talked about this in an incredibly humorous way. This is our scripture is that we should be quick to listen and slow to speak. Everybody should be. And James was the one who told us we should pay attention to that. So James is being the brother of Jesus. I think we should listen to James. He was the brother of Jesus. He said we should be quick to listen and slow to speak. And Ted talked about this, that this is really loving to our spouse, is to listen. Next slide, listen, understand, and validate. That I'm gonna listen, I'm gonna understand, I'm gonna validate. Do you know why we don't do that? Do you know why that we're not quick to listen and slow to speak? It's because of our defensiveness. And the truth is that defensiveness ends up destroying a relationship when somebody comes to you and says, hey, I want you to know what's going on with me. And what it really does is it's sort of an underhanded way of shifting the focus back on us. It's an underhanded way of blaming the other person. Okay, I know that's going on with you, but let me tell you what's going on with me. Or let me tell you why you shouldn't feel that way. Or let me tell you why that doesn't make sense. Or let me tell you why I didn't mean what I said. No, that's not the goal here. We're defensive because we're insecure. We feel like someone's attacking us. I want you to know this. Healthy people, when they're attacked verbally by other people, even if somebody is attacking you, healthy people don't become defensive. They're willing, not only willing, they're able to just sit back and go, okay, I'm gonna try and learn from this. Because healthy people explore all of the information. They realize I don't benefit from information I don't have, so I'm gonna listen and I'm gonna ask questions. And I'm gonna continue to try to find out what's going on here. And what happens is in the midst of this, the defensiveness that comes up inside of us that wants to tell our side of the story, this is how we normally listen, right? The other person's mouth is moving while we're thinking about what we're gonna say next, like we all do this. Instead, I'm gonna get rid of all that. Today, this conversation, this moment is not about me. This moment is about this person. This moment is about my spouse. This moment is they're in distress. What do they need? And the thing is in the midst of that, we're tempted to go back to our core pattern. And this is, honestly, this is the linchpin of forming a new pattern. I mean, most of us can become aware, we can work at that. And we can become more and more aware as we become more healthy. And we can even start engaging by trying to engage in a healthy way. When we go to our spouse, instead of attacking them, instead of blaming them, instead of pointing a finger, we can figure out nice ways to sit down and affirm them and then say, hey, I just want you to know, here's something I'm feeling and I want you to know because I need your help with it. Most of us are willing to do that. The problem is somebody on the other side, and usually it can be us, when we're on the other side of that, we become defensive immediately because we didn't want to hurt them. We didn't want them to feel like what they were feeling. As a matter of fact, in some cases, what they're feeling, we even know is not connected to what we did, but connected to something else. And so what happens is we want to turn it around. We want to explain to them why they're wrong. And the reason this is the linchpin to the whole thing is because this requires discipline and strength and wisdom and courage. In this moment, you have to decide, are you the speaker, are you the listener? You know, when you're having this conversation, in order to explore, you have to decide in this conversation, I am the listener. You can't be both. It's not like, okay, you were the speaker and I'm the listener. Now I'm gonna be the speaker and you're gonna be the listener. That's not the way this works. See, this is a new pattern. That's the way your old pattern worked. The new pattern is, as you talk to me about your distress, as you come to me in vulnerability, I'm gonna explore, I'm gonna ask questions, I'm gonna listen. And do you know what comes along with that? Passion and compassion grows as you become a student of your spouse. as you come to know them better. Years ago, a mentor of mine, when I was trying to figure out what was going on with my wife and try to fix her and take all I was learning over here and all these books I was reading and try to get her to behave differently, my mentor of mine said, hey, have you ever read Ephesians 5? And I was like, yeah, a whole bunch of times. He's like, good, you need to read it again because you're not employing it in your relationship. And I was like, well, what part? He's like, go read it again. We'll have a conversation. So we sit down in a conversation and he said, did you get it? And I said, I think so. And I started talking, he goes, no, you didn't get it. He said, this scripture encourages you in Ephesians 5, husbands, to live with your wives according to knowledge. That's what Ephesians 5 says. That's what this is. To be a student of her, to discover her joys and her fears, her difficulties, her pains, her anxieties. As you live with your wife according to knowledge, you'll become less defensive. You'll become compassionate. And that's what happened for me. The goal of this stage is to discover in your spouse, what do you need? What do you need? As you're coming to me in distress or in difficulty or something happened in a relationship, even if you're gonna point a finger, if you can stop and go, okay, I'm trying to explore and discover, what do you need? I'll just say this. The objection is, what about my needs? This conversation isn't about you. If you have needs and you have a difficulty, then you need to engage at a later date related to your issues, related to your difficulties, after you've taken the time to become self-aware. But when somebody comes to you and they're self-aware and they've come to a place where they're gonna approach you and they're gonna engage in vulnerability, now is not the time to be defensive. That will shut them down every single time and you will go nowhere. You will not make it to the last step, which is to resolve. To resolve things and to move them into the past. Now, this takes time. You're gonna have to go through this cycle over and over and over to resolve some of these things, but you'll resolve not the personality conflicts, but you'll resolve some of these things because here's what happens. When you start with you and you begin to explore and you realize that there are things going on inside of you that causes you to respond or react in certain ways, when you realize what's at stake in your relationship, and what's possible, because if you don't recognize that and you're not somebody who's self-aware, what you'll do is you'll stonewall the relationship. And what stonewalling is, I'm gonna step out, I'm gonna refuse to continue to move forward, or I'm gonna do something that puts our relationship at a stalemate. That when you come to me, now I'm gonna point back at you, or I'm gonna shift the focus from your need or your difficulty onto my need and my difficulty. And instead of really confronting the issues and exploring and discovering what's going on and comforting your spouse, what you do is you decide that you're gonna put a blockade, you're gonna put a roadblock in the way of moving forward in your relationship. You don't decide that on purpose, because nobody decides that on purpose. But the reality is for you to really explore and discover what's going on with them and realize that everything that's responding inside of you and is pushing back inside of you is connected to something else that you should deal with at a different date. When you continue to move towards them and after you discover, this is what's so important, after you've explored and you discover what they need, this requires verbal affirmation and physical touch. And I told you the story of a friend of mine who said it was so tough. I knew what was going on with her. I knew why she was hurt. And I couldn't walk across the kitchen to wrap my arms around her and to affirm her, and to let her know that everything was okay. And the reality is when he discovered that about himself and he realized what she needed, now he had a growth goal. My growth goal is to move towards her verbally and physically and affirm that everything's going to be okay. Here's why. She didn't receive that in childhood. And the reality is in that moment, God uses her to comfort her with the comfort he's received from his Father in heaven. This is why it's gotta start with you. This is why awareness and realizing your own issues has to start with you. See, resolve, and we used this word last week, relief, comes when we can look at what's happening, when we've got awareness, when we've engaged in a healthy way, when you fully explored and understand exactly what they need, and you come to a place where you go, hey, we both want things to be different. Here's how and when and what we're going to do in the future to make sure we don't continue to go in the same direction. Now, these steps will help you, but there's one idea that Gottman discovered that is at the heart of all of this and supersedes all of it. In fact, it was the one thing that they discovered. In fact, in early sessions, most of the time in the first conversation, they could discover with a 90% accuracy whether couples were gonna grow and move through their issues or whether they were ultimately gonna continue to move apart and split. You know what the difference was? This is what he said. Marriages that make it move toward each other to defeat their enemy. Now, this is why this is important. Because most of the time in the relationship, when there's conflict, who's the enemy? Your spouse, your partner, the person you're in a relationship with, the way they're acting, if they would change and they would love you, they would be your partner. Why are you trying to hurt me? Why are you moving away from me? And the reality is this core pattern has led you into that situation. Your partner is not the enemy. Now, I don't have time to tell you the full story, but I have to tell you that at the bottom, for me and my wife, I'm not proud of this. 7 years into our relationship, I learned a whole bunch of things, and we were discovering all this, and we were trying to discover the truth about all of this. And I moved from being a pleaser. I wanted everything to be okay, and I wanted to make sure that our relationship was gonna make it. I wasn't sure we were gonna make it. And I started becoming a vacillator. And I started to push away, and I started to pout, and I started to be upset. And the truth is, I remember one day, I'll never forget this image, unfortunately. I've received forgiveness for this, but I remember sitting on the floor in our kids' room. Our kids weren't at home, and I remember my wife sobbing. I'd never seen her cry because of something I had done before. Now that may be normal to you, but my wife is a bit of an avoider, and emotion is not normal for her. And when she could finally speak, this is what she said. She said, "Why are you being so mean?" See, this goes back to the very beginning. The wisest man who ever lived penned these words for us. He said, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. And the real enemy had gotten a hold of my heart. See, couples who make it, couples who experience high levels of satisfaction, who experience what God intended them to experience, they see themselves as a team and they realize they have a very real enemy. The core pattern that they have is their enemy, but there's an enemy that continues to stir them and point them into their core pattern, and he's trying to divide them apart. And couples who can sit over here and go, no, that's our problem, that's the enemy, and we're gonna work together to fight the enemy. Those are the couples that make it and enjoy greater levels of satisfaction. And the truth is if you wanna know what love is, you'll prioritize greater self-awareness in yourself. You'll engage your spouse or your partner with authenticity and respect and vulnerability. You'll explore their deepest feelings and hurts and needs and desires. And ultimately, you'll learn to resolve, to provide comfort in the midst of distress. And that will bring healing, health, and the bonding that the truth is we all want to experience. And it'll help us all to discover what true love is. Let me pray for you. God, I pray for somebody who's here today, and the truth is I don't know what the level of satisfaction is in their relationship, but they are hoping for more, and they're desirous of more. And they maybe don't realize, but there's an enemy that's been at work. There's an enemy that's continued to steer them in a pattern over and over and over that's exhausting, that ends up becoming a spiral downward that ultimately destroys relationships. And what you did is you made it possible for all of us to break that pattern. And you did it by seeing us. You were aware of us in our distress. And you sent your son to engage us and to heal us. You invite us to explore our deepest feelings and to come to you with those things because you can provide relief. You can provide resolve in our hearts, allowing us to take the comfort we received and offer it to other people. I pray that you'd give us the courage to explore. You'd give us the courage to become aware. You'd give us the courage to engage in healthier ways, and that you would empower us to experience something beyond what we thought was possible because of your love in us, flowing through us, the definition of true love. And I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. If you want some more help or information on any of this, the website where that quiz is, there's lots of good resources. This book, I commend this book to you. It's an incredible book. This is actually the old cover, but the new cover has similar colors. This book has so much information. I know it looks thick, has so much information. There's a workbook that goes with it. If you want to explore, you can do this on your own. You can do this with your spouse, but this is an incredible place to continue if you want to continue with some more of this content. Thank you so much for joining us in this series. We hope to see you next week as we begin in the book of Colossians. You guys have a great week. Fall break if you're taking off, and we'll see you next Sunday back here at Mission.